Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about Russia. A very important statement came from Moscow. The director of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Naryshkin, told us that he is ready to meet with CIA Director John Ratcliffe if the US is interested. When asked whether contacts between the intelligence service, foreign intelligence service of Russia and the CIA are still in place, he noted that we have an official representative in Washington and the Central Intelligence Agency has an official representative in Moscow. This is a very important statement, and what does it mean? This means that the Russians proposed to the United States of America to begin the preparation of negotiation process between Putin and Trump, and Russia wants CIA and the Foreign Intelligence Service to be responsible for this process, not embassies, not any other country, not the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but just the intelligence services, CIA from the United States side and the Foreign Intelligence Service from the Russian side. So which means that today we can say that officially the preparation for the negotiation process has begun. Now let's move to the line of combat contact and let's discuss the situation in the ground. And of course the most important updates are coming from the territory of Velyka Novosilka. As you can see, the map was adjusted significantly in Russian favor, and the changes on the ground were made based on several videos that we got from the southern part and from the northern part. Let's begin with the northern part. Today the Russian sources published the video how they managed to establish the flag in the most southern part of the northern Velyka Novosilka. This video was prepared by the 40th Separate Brigade of the Armed Forces of Russian Federation, and the Russians made just a short video of how they were attacking the territory of Velyka Novosilka from the north and from the northeastern direction. There are lots of episodes, some violence in the video, and many other things, and the most important part is coming from the final part of the video. In this video we can see the big building, very high-rise building, and we see two flags that were raised in the north, in the most let's say the toppest floor. According to the geolocation, this is exactly the building where the Russians raised their flags, and based on this video we have adjusted the territory further in the northern direction and in the eastern direction. For example, this is the situation that we might see at the end, by the end of the 24th of January of 2025. As you can see, the majority of the territories were considered as a contested area or the gray zone, but by the end of the 25th of January we have no doubts that most of the territories in the north and in the northeast of the city of Velyka Novosilka were captured by the Russians completely. So this is the situation in this area. Later, a bit later, probably several hours later, after the Russians published the video from the northern part, the Russian sources published the video from the southern part. And in this video we can see the most northern part of the southern Velyka Novosilka. We can recognize buildings according to their shapes on the map, and right exactly starting from this moment we can see another building, and we can see another Russian flag that was raised on the roof of this construction. Based on this video we have adjusted the map in this area. During the day, not like during the day, but by the evening, right before we start making this video, the Russian sources gave some statistics regarding the battles and the clashes in the southern part of the settlement. The Russians are saying that there are still several pockets of resistance, but they play no role. It's just the way probably to win some days for these soldiers. The Russians are saying that just during the battle for the southern part of Velyka Novosilka, the 110th Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine lost up to 300 soldiers just for battle or for this area. These soldiers decided not to surrender, they decided to fight till the last, and now we see the consequences. Maybe they expected or waited that the Ukrainians would have unblocked them, but most likely their expectations failed. Now the Russians, there's just one block left for the Russians. Most likely this upcoming night between the 25th and the 26th of January, the Russians will begin offensive in the northern and the northwestern part of Velyka Novosilka. At least when talking about this situation, the Russians have already begun the artillery preparation. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the most northern part of the settlement, and most likely after this artillery preparation we should expect the ground operation as well. So maybe tomorrow the Russians will raise the flag, and maybe tomorrow tomorrow the Ministry of Defense and will confirm Russian control over this territory, and then we can just guess where the Russians are going to move forward next. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kurakhove direction. We got a lot of very interesting updates from this territory as well, and let's start from the settlement of Udachne. From Dachne, according to different sources, both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the northeastern part of the settlement of Dachne. There are very heavy clashes for these outskirts. The Ukrainians are trying to counterattack and to force the Russians to fall back from these territories, but most likely the Russians will be able to dig in deeper. So basically the final battle for Dachne has begun. Maybe tomorrow the Russians will improve their positions, and during the next 48 hours the settlement will fall in Russian hands. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern part of this pocket. Additional tree lines and fields were captured by the Russians according to neutral mappers. The main purpose of this attack is to get as close as possible to the N15 road and to cut the Ukrainians from Dachne from supply and support. And another purpose of this attack is to move in the direction of the settlement of Velyka. The Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over the southeastern part of the settlement with the purpose to secure the possible roads for Russian offensive. Another important video is coming from the area between Konstantinopol and Velyka itself. In this video we can see how the Russians managed to discover another pontoon bridge that was established by the Ukrainians several days ago, and as a result of FAB strike or missile strike the Russians managed to destroy this bridge, and this situation leads to collapse of Ukrainian logistic for the settlements like Velyka and Dachne. This is a very important video, and the importance of this video is that since the beginning of January the Russians were destroying the Ukrainian logistic massively. For example, just during January we got at least 4 videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the main bridge between the settlement of Konstantinopol and Velyka. In this video we can see several strikes on the Ukrainian bridge, and as a result of this attack, those strikes, the bridge was destroyed. Then we have several more videos also from the same area. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians bombed the same bridge with FABs. So this main road was destroyed probably somewhere by the 20th of January of 2025. But then the Ukrainians built another bridge, another pontoon bridge a bit further to the north. And today on the 25th of January the Russians destroyed and this bridge. So now Ukrainians have no logistic. The weather is not so good. It's impossible. It's very difficult to let's say evacuate wounded soldiers, and this is now a very important thing for the Ukrainians. Most likely the Russians began the final assault, so this is everything is telling us about this. Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources published another very important video from the fields between the settlement of Konstantinopol and the town of Rozliv. In this video we can see another Russian attack with the use of a significant number of soldiers. The Russians were trying to attack or to improve their positions on the way to the village of Rozliv. We don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to improve their positions or not, but anyway we see that the Russians began checking and the Russians began testing the Ukrainian defense lines in this part of Andreevka fortified area as well. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Dnipro direction. As we discussed in the previous video, the Russians currently, the edge Russian positions currently in somewhere around 4.5 kilometers from the border between the Donetsk region and the Dnipro region, and most likely the Russians are going to advance in this area. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see according to the icons, the Russians managed to improve their positions. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 24th of January of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 25th. Yes, of course, the Russians are not moving like hundreds of kilometers a day. The Russians are moving just hundreds meters a day, but the Russians are moving. You know that Ukrainians stopped any finance, any fundings of Ukraine, and the Russians will have obviously up to 100 days to defeat the Ukrainians and to let's say to get the turning. But currently this is the turning point. This pause that the United States created with the relations in Ukraine can give the Russians significant boost, significant benefits for the next several months. But obviously sooner or later this situation will be finished, and then the United States of America will take a look whether the Russians manage to improve their positions and to finish the war or not. Otherwise the US will begin acting. The Russians most likely have these 100 days, and during the next 100 days they will try to do everything they can with the purpose to break the situation completely and to force the Ukrainians to surrender in Russian favor on the Russian terms. Well, let's discuss the situation on the ground. The Russians, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, were trying to outflank the settlement of Udachna from the south, and the Russians managed to do the same, or at least the Russians tried to semi-encircle the settlement of Udachna from the north. At least different mappers and different sources reported about these attempts. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinivka direction. We have lots of very icons, lots of very important updates. First of all, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians entered the village of Zelene. Furthermore, I'll remind you that just several days ago, the Russians captured Baranovka, and if all these updates is correct, then most likely during the next week, the Russians will try to attack the settlement of Tarasovka, and the Russians will try to attack the settlement of Alexandropol. So, based on this, we can make a conclusion that the Russians will try to move in the northern direction with the purpose to get the settlement of Yablunovka. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians began offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Kalinova. Now the Russians are trying to outflank this settlement from the southwest, and the Russians are trying to attack this settlement from the southeast. So this is the Russian famous tactics to take the settlements in pincers and to outflank them. Furthermore, the Russians began advancing from the settlement of New York in the western directions, trying to attack the village of Sukhaya Balka. At least one stronghold was captured by the Russians. Now we see the picture in this area, and this is just the puzzle, just a piece of puzzle in the big picture. Now let's move to the city of Terezk, and during the previous 24 hours we got very important geolocation from the village of Krymska. In this video we can see Russian soldiers that were moving in the village of Krymska, taking positions under control. And when the Ukrainians discovered the presence of the Russians, they began attacking them. There were lots of episodes in that video that you just seen, and one of the episodes took place exactly in this area. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. So we can say that currently the Russians control up to 50% of the village of Krymska, and most likely during the next several days, the Russians will finish the battle for this territory. Furthermore, when talking about Russian sources, during the day we got a lot of updates about the situation on the ground. For example, the Russians said that during the previous day, during the previous 24 hours, they managed to improve their position significantly on the territory of mine, and the Russians are saying that this evening or this night between the 25th and the 26th of January, most likely we're gonna get a lot of very interesting updates exactly from this area. So maybe tomorrow the Russians will announce complete control over the settlement of Tarskoye, and the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasiv Yar. The Russians continue advancing, trying to encircle the Ukrainians in the central part. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the forest in the southern part of the settlement. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the citadel. The Ukrainians still control this territory. It's very difficult to Ukrainians, and every single day it's become more and more difficult for the Ukrainians to hold their positions on the territory of the citadel, because the Russians are tightening the noose around this area. The Russians are cutting the supply lines, and most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this area very soon. And after that, it is very difficult to understand what is going to happen next, because different pro-Russian sources reported that currently there are very heavy clashes for the territory of Stupuchki. We still haven't received even a single geolocation that can confirm this, but this information was provided us by very reliable sources, by soldiers who are currently fighting in this direction. So there is a Telegram channel of a soldier who is responsible, who participates in the battle for the southern Chasiv Yar direction, and he stated that the Russians managed to reach the outskirts of this settlement. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, then the situation for the Ukrainians in the area of Chasiv Yar will become probably worst ever since the beginning of the special military operation. Furthermore, from these positions, from the area of Stupuchki, the Russians will have no barriers to move further in the direction of Konstantinivka itself. And now, summarizing everything, we see that the Russians in the very near future are going to begin offensive operation in the area of Konstantinivka from the east, east from the area of Chasiv Yar, from the south from the city of Terezk, and along N32 road. As for now, the Russians are very far from the city of Konstantinivka, but obviously during the next 2-3 months the Russians will improve their position significantly, and most likely at the beginning or somewhere in the mid of the upcoming spring the Russians will begin the major offensive operation and the battle for Konstantinivka will begin. Now let's move further. As for the Syria's direction, we haven't received anything special. As for the Liman direction, we also haven't received anything. Most likely the Ukrainians, as a result of counterattacks in this area that's been taking place for the previous 5 days, managed to stabilize the situation. They managed to bring soldiers in this area, and now the Russians are trying to attack Ukrainian forces with FPV drones. So now the Russians started everything from the beginning. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sudzha direction. From this area we got lots of very interesting updates. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians continue bringing more and more forces on the territory of Sudzha, and the Russians are saying that when they analyzed the data they had, they came to conclusion that most likely the Ukrainians are planning to begin another offensive operation in the area of Sudzha, in the Sudzha direction, in the Kursk area more precisely, and the Russians are saying that most likely the Ukrainians will try to attack the settlement of Tyotkina, and now they try to stabilize the situation in Sudzha and to reduce the Russian activities and not allow the Russians to break through the lines. And as soon as the Ukrainians are able to stabilize this area, most likely we should expect a Ukraine offensive operation from the Sumy region in the direction of Tyotkina and then further in the direction of Zvanne and Glushkova. The main purpose of this Ukraine attack is to establish the lines along the river of Seym. If Ukrainians are able to establish the lines along the front line and the line of combat contact along this river, the Russians' chances to restore control over this territory would be much lower in comparison with the current situation. But obviously the Russians understand the situation. Most likely they will be prepared before this. As for the north in Kupiansk direction, we haven't received anything special, just different sources reported about very heavy clashes in this area, but as you can see, without any proofs. The most important things are coming from the southern area, where the Russians attacked the southern part of Sudzha, and how the Ukrainians of the 61st Mechanized Brigade were repelling Russian attacks. In this video we can see how the Russian stormtroopers were entering the village from the south, from the forest, and how the Ukrainians were trying to repel them. So based on this video we have adjusted the map. Now we understand more or less the line of combat contact in this area. The Russians control the farms in this area and the Ukrainians control almost the entire village. So this is the situation, and most likely the Russians will continue offensive because they understand that if the Russians are able to attack and to enter the Sudzha itself, then most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to stop any plans or to change any plans regarding their possible another offensive operation that was stated by Syrskyi. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, share my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.